Okay, if you didn't get one, we just passed them out ahead of time so that they could be there. So everybody should have 2 sheets of paper in front of you, white and either buff or blue, they're the same. We just ran out of buff paper. Page, whatever it is. So I understand that the silence last night during Vespers made some people a little uncomfortable. So I learned a long time ago in spirituality from my spiritual mentor, the Reverend Jim Bain, that if something makes you uncomfortable in spirituality, then you probably should do more of it. So, anybody here from Lima Southside? Woo! Yeah! Another of my heroes, Jane Hilvers, taught me this, that when you get stressed, you should breathe in Jesus and breathe out your stress. The problem is, usually we start that with breathing in, and there's no room for Jesus. So you got to start by breathing out first. So everybody sit straight in your chair, put your feet on the floor. Some of you didn't have the opportunity to be part of morning watch. So let's just do a moment of silence and deep breathing here. So close your eyes. Start by breathing out. Breathe out your stress. Breathe in Jesus. Do that a few times. Okay, here we are. See, that wasn't too much silence. Now, John, was that enough? Was that
Too much.
Too much.
Too much.
A few of us have been to the Abbey at Gethsemane. John, I think you should go there. It's in this beautiful little town called Trappist, Kentucky. And monks live there their whole life in silence, except for their 7 times a day when they gather in the chapel to chant. You go there for 72 hours of silence.
I don't approve.
So, I came at this whole issue of conflict mediation in a roundabout way. I just give you a 1-minute overview of how that happened. I grew up in the 70s. Forrest Gump was a contemporary of mine, right? Just a little bit older. But through that time when in elementary school, some of you probably heard your parents or grandparents tell you this. In elementary school, we practiced not just fire drills, but we practiced nuclear bomb drills. It was the funniest thing. There was a basement in my elementary school where they kept the furnaces. It was a scary place. But once every fall, they'd make everybody go down to the basement in case there was a nuclear bomb that dropped on Warren, Ohio. Right? So I grew up in that era where everybody just assumed that we would annihilate each other, the United States and the Soviet Union, through nuclear weapons. And that was my first kind of hint that maybe I needed to be involved in something bigger in my life. And then, of course, I grew up during the Woodstock era too, when it was make love, not war. You know, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. None of which I had anything to do with. I just dreamed about it all. So the peace side that John showed you yesterday was, something that was part of my life from the very beginning. And I can still remember my first pair of bell-bottom jeans. And my parents thought that was awful because I was turning into one of those hippies that participated in drugs and sex and rock and roll. So I grew and changed and went on the UN seminar in high school and got another hint of maybe there's something bigger in life that I should be involved in called political action. And then went to college and sort of was in oblivion, in music oblivion for 4 years until 1978 when I did my student teaching in Bogota, Colombia, Chrissy's home. And that's right, and learned about extreme poverty and learned that I was a privileged American. And so got sort of another hint that things weren't quite as they should be in life. And then I was in seminary. Some of you watched Romero last night. I was in seminary in 1980 when Oscar Romero was assassinated, and people started talking in the United States about our government doing bad things. And then I took a class in liberation theology, which came from Latin America, which is in a one-sentence statement, the idea that Christianity has to do with the poor, and we should be concerned about the poor and those without power in the world, and that's who Jesus cared about and cares about still today. So that kind of all started to come together after I had this experience of seeing people who lived in extreme poverty. I can still remember in the streets of Bogota, Colombia, feeling the most afraid when you would be walking down the street in the city and you'd see a gang of children coming at you. I'm like, 8, 10, 11-year-old children. They were called gamines, and they were street children, and they ran in gangs in Bogota, Colombia, and would accost rich Americans and take their watch and their money and whatever they could get from them. So that all started to kind of gel in my life, and I became politically active, decided I needed to vote and be involved in politics, supporting politicians who I thought had the right ideas about the kind of things our government should do in this world, which was take care of people that are poor, that can't take care of themselves, and you know all that. And I eventually decided, it came to the conclusion that I couldn't be involved in every political movement that existed. So I decided I kind of needed to narrow my focus. First, that was on hunger issues. I was involved in Bread for the World for a while. I was a speaker. And then realized that hunger issues were related to environmental issues. And sort of the environmental movement is where I have settled in terms of political action over the last few years. But in the midst of that, I took a job that Dr. Bynum has now as Associate Regional Minister, and was told I had to go visit churches that were fighting, churches that were in conflict. So I began to learn about this whole idea of how does one mediate conflict, and I had to do that because it was part of my ministry as an Associate Regional Minister. So I ended up getting some conflict training, and some more conflict mediation training, and some more conflict mediation training. And someday, if I ever retire from what I'm doing now, maybe I'll be a family court mediator. And I really like this idea of mediation. So that's how I kind of arrived at feeling like dealing with conflict is an important thing in our lives. So that's where I am. Now, you can see that up there. Disagreements, and a lot of this Margot talked about on Monday morning, so some of it's going to kind of be a review with some different language. And I, by the way, am a visual learner. I have to have paper in front of me. That's why you have paper. So if you're not a visual learner, feel free to ignore it. If you are, you've got the comfort of having the paper in front of you. The white page that you have has the outline in front and back of what I'm going to talk about. So if you want to look at that, you can. If you don't, just leave it, just put it away, and I'll take it back. So let's see. Disagreements are inevitable in life. How many of you have had a disagreement already this morning with someone? Already this morning? Come on. Oh, well. Yeah, they're inevitable. It's a conflict that is when disagreement turns into conflict, that's what doesn't have to happen. If we are careful and pay attention to ways we relate to other people, disagreements need not turn into serious conflict. So that's what I want to talk about. That's the key concept I want to talk about this morning. So the goal is how to make that happen, and I want this to be intensely practical. So here's how we're going to do that. Staff, are we having chip beef this week?
Yeah.
When?
Thursday.
Tomorrow for supper. Okay, chip beef. Camp Christian tradition, right? Stand up if you love chip beef. The rest of you, how do you feel about chip beef?
The wrong way.
Okay, you sit back down. So this is what we're going to do. Okay, you all who just stood up, you are the... I should be careful about my language here. FCB. You are the FCB party. For chip beef. You who remain seated, you are the ACB party. Against chipped beef. We ready for a conflict? We'll work on that. See, we can disagree about that, right? It doesn't have to become a conflict. That's going to be our frame of reference for the next few minutes. So why? Oh, by the way, there it is. I looked for pictures of dogs fighting, but they were way too violent. So I'm not a cat person, so there you go. I'm more comfortable with that. Keep disagreements from escalating to higher level conflict. So those are terms that we're going to work on for the next few minutes. And I'm going to try and rush through this. I'm not going to do much interactive stuff in the keynote because I want you to have time to get to your group where we're going to practice some of the things that we're going to talk through in the next few minutes. So that's my goal, not to take too much time here. Okay, so why? Paul said, Romans 12:18, and there's a lot in Romans chapter 12 about conflict, about fighting and holding grudges. It's a great chapter. Paul said, if possible, to the best of your ability, live at peace with all people. There's some disagreement about whether Paul was talking about just people in the church or all people everywhere. I don't think it matters. Plenty of church fights to go around. There are plenty of other disagreements to go around as well. So that's my frame of reference. Our goal is to live peacefully with everyone in every context in our lives. And I'm going to try and give you some practical tools on how to actually do that. So I understand one of the groups has had some discussion about is this a God thing? Do we wait for God to give us peace, or are we supposed to pursue that on our own? And the answer is both and, actually, of course. But this morning, this is about what can you actually do as a person to be a peaceful person and to be a vehicle, an instrument of God's peace for others. That's what this is about. Okay? So, just some definitions. In the mediation world, there are two kinds of mediation, and this is a key concept. There's interest-based mediation and position-based mediation. Oh, any of your parents or any of you part of a labor union? Yeah. Parents part of labor unions? There are fewer and fewer people all the time, but when there is well, even if you're not, when there is a labor management dispute in this country, if labor and management can't resolve that on their own, what's the next thing that happens if they can't resolve it?
Call your union.
Huh?
Talk to your union rep.
Talk to the union rep, and then if it's all, like if they can't agree on a contract, what happens?
Right.
Strike. That's right. And if the strike goes on and on, sometimes they will call for mediation. And the problem with that is there are people who are called federal mediators, they actually work for the federal government, and they do position-based mediation. So the position of the labor union is we want these working conditions and we'll settle for nothing else, right? And the position of the management is forget it. We want that, we'll fire you all. When that happens, they call in a mediator, and the mediator typically does position-based bargaining. This is your position, this is your position, how do we resolve that conflict? What they ought to do is interest-based bargaining or mediation, but they don't. If they do interest-based, they look, and Margot used this language on Monday morning. What is your interest? Well, my interest is, I want better working conditions, right? Or I want better pay. Or the management says, we don't want to pay as much. So the interest is, of course, a management profit for the business owners. The interest for the labor union people is we want to be able to live on what we earn. So you look for those interests and you try and figure out how can we meet those interests? How do we compromise? And then there's another term on there too, just so you understand the legal language. There's negotiation. That disagreement you had this morning with somebody. You know, you negotiated it out probably, right? You just talked it out. Or you had a brief interaction and you settled it and you went on. If just talking about something doesn't work, then you go to mediation. Mediation doesn't work. There's something called binding arbitration. Anybody ever heard that term? You know what it is? What is it, Sarah?
Essentially, an outside, objective, non-biased party is going to decide what's best in the best interest of everyone is generally the legal language they use. And then whatever is decided in that meeting or subsequent meetings is what goes, and you really don't have any recourse if you're not happy with it.
That's right. So the For Chip Beef Party says, we want chip beef at Camp Christian. The Against Chip Beef Party says, we don't want chip beef served anymore at Camp Christian. So you hire an arbitrator who listens to both sides and all the arguments for and against and makes a ruling. And both parties have to agree to abide, to be bound to that ruling. That's arbitration. If that doesn't work, then the last thing is what? Court. You go to court. And that's, of course, there are no lawyers here, are there? I could have had a lawyer joke. Yeah, lawyers are for when people can't negotiate, they can't mediate, they can't arbitrate, so they litigate. They go to court. That's what lawyers do. And actually, if you go to law school at the Ohio State University, they teach you how to mediate too, how to keep people out of court. So it's a pretty cool thing. It's kind of a new movement in law today. Okay, so there's all that. I don't want to spend much time on that. Interest-based bargaining is about finding a win-win solution for everybody. You listen before you talk. You separate the issues from the people, that is a perfect example of teachers' unions and school administrators, principals and superintendents. They have to maintain a relationship because they got to work together. You know, when a labor dispute's all done, they still got to work together. So in interest-based bargaining or mediation, you decide, we're going to maintain our relationship. We have to. We're going to work this out while still staying in relationship with each other. So that's the difference between position and interest. Position-based mediation, it's win-lose. We'll talk more about that. Okay, so the next idea I want to give you is there are levels of conflict. Okay, and I put some examples on there. So, level 1, disagreements, they're just problems to solve. This is the kind of everyday disagreements you have with people over everything. If you're married, it's, you know, it could be, what do we have for breakfast? Where do we go for lunch? What time should the kids go to bed? Yeah. You know, what happens when my kid does this and you disagree? You know, it's negotiating life. You have roommates. All of you probably have roommates, right? I mean, it's negotiating, you know, leaving the lights on or turning the lights off, leaving the computer on or turning it off. You know, it's negotiating all those kinds of things. You're going to a movie with someone. What movie do you want to go see? Okay? You say what you want to see, the other person says what he or she wants to see, and usually you're able to make a decision, right? Pretty easily. Am I right?
Yeah.
You just make a decision and you go. Sometimes you're not happy, sometimes the other person's not happy. It all comes out in the wash. So that's disagreement, that's negotiation, okay? So, the goal, again, is to keep that kind of disagreement from escalating to a higher level disagreement. Escalation means it gets more serious, okay? So, level 2 conflict is when disagreements actually turn into conflict. Disagreements beyond problems to solve, and trust begins to erode. So, what's my example on my paper there? For level 2, you did what? So, how many of you have had to pay electric bills in your life? Yeah, and you had a roommate that you had to share that bill with? That ever turned into a problem? So you give your roommate the money to pay your portion of the electric bill, and she spends it on what? Something else, right? Pizza. Beer. Very good. Beer. You gotta help me out. She spends it on beer. And the electric gets turned on, or you get the late notice in the mail, and you say, you did what with the electric bill money? So trust begins to erode at that point. Now it's a conflict that has to be worked out. So it's escalated beyond just a disagreement. Level 3, disagreements turn into win-lose contests. Becomes a contest at that point. Level 3, we will never, we are Cleveland Indians fans. We could have a for Chief Wahoo party and against Chief Wahoo party, right? Someone tell everyone else what Chief Wahoo is.
Very racist.
Says the resident.
Those are judgmental words.
Tradition, Jack.
Say again what you said.
It is a inflammatory, somewhat racist logo that depicts a Native American in a way that might not be fun.
Who disagrees with John on that? What is Chief Wahoo?
It's old-fashioned tradition that has been around long enough where it's not necessarily always taken that way, but I can still see it as very racist. But right. Chief
Wahoo is a caricature of what what the Cleveland Indians claim to be a Native American. This big, smiley, ugly thing. And yeah, there's lots of debate in Cleveland every spring about whether the Cleveland Indians should get rid of Chief Wahoo as their logo or not. So, yeah, when it escalates, when conflict escalates, then it's win-lose. People say, we will never let go of Chief Wahoo, or I'll never go to another Indians game until they get rid of Chief Wahoo. That's an escalation. And you put those people in the same room, and they may have strong words for each other. So that's escalation beyond just win-lose, and trust begins to erode. They don't like each other at that point. Level 4 conflict. Fight or flight. You either duke it out or you leave. So your roommate doesn't pay the electric bill 3 times, and you either have a big fight, you duke it out, or you just find another roommate, right? You move out. Yeah, so that's the fight or flight. Your relationship is broken, and it's really hard to repair at that point. I do some marriage counseling. All of us pastors do some marriage counseling, and this is actually important. Most couples who come for marriage counseling wait until they're at the fight or flight. Am I right? Before they come talk to someone about their relationship. And it's already pretty much too late, unless there's a miracle from God in that relationship. They've already said and done things, and they're at the fight or flight level of escalation of conflict. And it's really hard to work with couples when they get to that point. Usually I just hand them a list of other counselors and say, go find somebody more skilled than me to do that. Because I'm not going to have much chance. So, level 5 conflict can be simply described as you bring out the big guns. You want to annihilate the other person. So give me an example. Someone give me an example of level 5 conflict in the world right now.
Nuclear bomb.
Keep going. A specific example. Israel, Palestine. Yeah. More specifically, Israel and Hamas, right? The militant part of Palestinians. Yeah, they brought out the big guns. That conflict has escalated to level 5, and John Kerry, our Secretary of State, is trying to mediate a level 5 conflict, and it's virtually impossible. The conflict has to be de-escalated at that point, back to level 2 or level 3. See, the trust is already gone. It's already a win-lose situation. Israel says Palestine will never exist as a state in the land of Israel. Palestine says Israel must be annihilated from the face of the earth. It should never exist as a state in the land of Palestine. Yeah. That's an intractable situation. So it's escalated to level 5. So again, what's our goal? What's our goal as people that are involved in disagreements all the time? What's the goal?
Turn the heat down.
To not be destroyed.
To not be destroyed. That's talking about, that's win-lose language. The goal is to keep the disagreements from escalating to that level.
I'm not sure if you define conflict.
Oh, I forgot that, didn't I? Sorry about that. I don't actually want to define conflict. It's not what is conflict, but what is conflict like? I skipped right over that. What is conflict like? To you, what is conflict like? Tension, stress. Come on, jump in.
Fighting.
Huh?
Fighting.
Uncomfortable?
Fighting.
Fighting?
Anxiety.
Anxiety. Unrest. What else?
Drama.
Drama.
Entertaining?
Entertaining? Who said that? Why did you say that?
It can be entertaining. I mean, if it's not a life or death situation, I enjoy a good argument or some sort of conflict.
You a fan of Dr. Phil, are you?
Sure.
Lori wrote that.
Heart-rending. Heart-wrenching? Rending. Heart-rending. That's good. Soul destroying. Yeah, that's what conflict feels like. Huh. Unless it's on TV and we're watching for entertainment. It's devastating. That's right. That's what conflict is like. It's disagreements that feel like those things. And again, our goal, and we actually have the ability to keep conflict from escalating in most situations in our lives. And when we can't keep it from escalating, there are things we can do to manage that conflict for ourselves. And that's really what this is about. Okay, so you got the levels of conflict. You understand what our goal is. To keep them from getting to taking sides. Have any of you ever been involved in a group conflict other than for chip beef or against chip beef? Can someone briefly describe a conflict between two groups that you've been involved in?
Just how CYF had a decent sized group of friends where two people had a date for a short while and they wound up breaking up, and there are a lot of people in the group took sides, and things were extremely rough for quite some time.
Probably many of you have had that experience where you had friends that were together, a couple, and they stopped being a couple, and you had to decide which one you were going to be friends with? That's interesting.
Roger, what about this one? The decision of the Christian Church in Ohio to change the summer camping program. Is that an example from a certain amount of weeks? Is that an example?
What do you all think? Was it? Is it an example? He said changing the camp program in Ohio. Some of you on sides in that discussion?
We're on the same side.
Did that escalate?
That escalated quickly.
To what level? What level did that discussion about how to change camp, what the process would be, and what it would look like?
Some would say it was roughly on par with Hamas and Israel. But those people, I think, are being a bit extreme. I would say that some win-lose language was being used instead of maybe the win-win or interest-based more. It's probably around a 3-ish, maybe 3 or I don't know. For some people, 4. For some people, they felt like they had to, the flight was something that was their response to that situation.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Thank you. Part of the challenge with this is, in order to have mediation, in order to have meaningful discussion over a disagreement, to keep it from escalating, both parties who are having the disagreement have to agree to work it out and to maintain the relationship while they work it out. If one party's not willing to do that, then boy, it's just really tough. It's really tough to mediate a situation. Yeah, good example. Good example. So, turn the paper over to the back side. Some tools now, just practical approach. There's some really important ideas. So what do we do with conflict? There's, everyone say, it's not about me. This is what that means. What?
It's you after all.
On your report, you just say it's not me, it's you. And we will both.
Yeah. Okay, so you four chipped beef people. When someone says, I hate chipped beef, do you take that personally?
Yes.
What happens if you take that personally?
You get offended.
You get offended, right. When you get offended, the disagreement escalates. So you have actually the power to keep that from escalating. If you think that's about me, if you take it personally, when someone insults your love of chipped beef, then that disagreement has the opportunity to escalate and feelings get hurt. Okay? Someone says, you're talking with the person you want to go to a movie with about what movie to go see. And you say, what's the newest romantic comedy out right now? What is it?
Great movie.
Why did I ask? So you want to go see, you want to go see a romantic comedy, and the person you're going to a movie with says to you, I hate romantic comedies. I want to go see Hercules save the world from annihilation. Or Guardians of the Galaxy, whatever. So, do you take that personally when that person says, I hate romantic comedy, or I hate action, thriller, shoot 'em up movies? It can feel like a judgment. So of course, you have to be careful. That's a jackal statement, right? Using Margot's language from Monday morning, I hate that.